think we should be money. I can't even talk about COVID stuff anymore now because I keep getting strikes on YouTube for spreading misinformation regarding any topic on COVID, and it's gotten so far out of hand that you can't even voice an opinion on YouTube, and they will strike your account and say that, again, you're intentionally spreading misinformation. Even if it's just an opinion podcast, they still come after me, and it's so ridiculous now.
The algorithm is just set up, it seems like, to denounce any kind of conversation on COVID. Now,
yeah. That being said, I think a lot of people are sick about hearing about COVID.
Yeah, especially because it seems like the opinion continues to change as far as the CDC goes, the WHO goes. Biden goes and says he has a plan, to combat COVID, which we all knew was a political lie. It was a farce that he was trying to go after Trump on, and then he comes out there and it's like, oh, well, by the way, federally we can't stop this. So to me, it just doesn't make sense. Like how federally you can't stop it, but at state level you can. Like I don't understand that.
Government cannot stop it.
Yeah,
that's what I've been saying since the beginning. Like this is real. It is a pandemic. It will affect people, but we have to be a little bit more somber, a little bit more humble about what we can actually accomplish when it comes to COVID.
Do you feel? Do you feel like the government can really accomplish anything when it comes to taking on this pandemic? Because if you look at like the stats from places like Florida, Texas, and things such as that, it just seems like this is just one of those things that the CDC director came out and said, we can't get an accurate number of those that actually died directly from COVID. Therefore, the numbers were fudged from the get-go. So who are we supposed to believe?
Yeah, this is a point I've been making since the beginning. And as data came out, we would publish that data. Like there was a good Stanford study, I think in early 2021, that tried to find a correlation between COVID policy, like lockdowns, mandates, and actual diminishing of the spread, and they can't. Right? It seems to have no effect. So, given that fact, you would think that there'd be a real rewiring of COVID policy. Again, it's understandable when people didn't know what was going on in the first couple of weeks to think that keeping people at home for 15 days to stop the spread.
Yeah.
I can forgive that. But I can't forgive 6 months later. I certainly can't forgive a year later when you knew better. And there are some things government should do, and that I think government did do under the Trump administration, which is basically act as a support mechanism. And that's aid to hospitals. That's Operation Warp Speed. It's these kind of things. It's pushing out therapeutics that are beneficial. Of course, the government has done the opposite of that. Right now, you can't get monoclonal antibodies. Texas, in particular, is at a loss there, and this seems to be a federal government problem because they have not taken the appropriate steps that were taken, in fact, under the Trump administration to get those kind of therapeutics out. And there's just been this sort of utterly strange backlash against therapeutics in general. Right, because they're so obsessed with people taking the vaccine. That's what's so odd about this. COVID has really brought out some of the strangest, strangest revelations of human nature globally. In fact, and it's depressing to see. I think everybody just wants to get past it, at least in Texas.
Well, that leads us to the next topic, and I know you said you didn't want to talk too much on it, but when you came out, you talked about how it's essentially getting FEMA involved in testing sites and stations such as that. Is this the direction you feel that the government should go as far as spending these taxpayer dollars on these testing sites when now you can order these testing kits, and get them delivered to your house in 7 days?
Well, not really. So you're referring to an interview where Fox News asked me to react to Biden's speech. And what I pointed out in that interview was simply, look, there's an appropriate role for government. Look at what the Trump administration did. Let's compare that to what the Biden administration is doing now. And there's some things Biden announced which I was like fine with. Do I support them? I mean, I'm kind of neutral on them. FEMA's not spending extra money, right? They can't spend extra money unless we have appropriated it, and we have not. But they still have a bunch left over. So it's already there. It's already spent. Under Trump, FEMA regularly had free testing sites. And I don't know why there was a weird backlash to that comment. Again, I wasn't like calling for it. I'm just saying it's fine. And there's no need for paranoia here. There's nothing crazy happening. You have probably gotten testing from a test site that was FEMA supported. Maybe you didn't know it. So, that was kind of a manufactured controversy, to be perfectly honest. But most controversies are manufactured.
And then it led to Marjorie Taylor Greene and coming after you. So I'm noticing a trend now on social media. And here's the thing. I'll be honest with you, man. I feel like a lot of the things that you say can be easily misinterpreted, or there's some things you've said in the past that people are continuously holding against you. And it seems now to me, and you and I have discussed this, as far as a lot of the Turning Point crowd, the Trump crowd, are coming after you hard now. What do you think the reason for this is?
It's hard to say. Look, I have a high name ID, so my name is clickbait. That's, I'd hate to reduce it to something so simple, but it is, because it's not like I've done anything, right? Because we can go through every one of these little controversies, and maybe we should, and we can debunk them. I can show you exactly how it was deliberately taken out of context to manufacture some kind of division that doesn't exist. This is a common thing that happens on the right. They get bored with the left, right? They get bored attacking the left, and they start to turn inward. And as I know, manufacture divisions that aren't really there. The wonderful thing about the right and conservatism in general is that it lives in a box, right? Our principles have to live in a box. They can't just be expanded endlessly like a progressive can. And so you're not going to find that much disagreement philosophically between me or anybody else in the most conservative members of the caucus. And so there's this, but in order to one up each other, people have to look for reasons that they're better than their colleagues, that they're, and I don't just mean politicians, by the way. I'm speaking just in generally. It applies to politicians, to Instagram influencers, to podcast hosts, radio hosts, whatever it is. And there's this need to sort of carve out a space for themselves. And one up others in order to do so, and they'll look for any reason to do that. I hate to reduce it to something so simple, but it does seem to be based on clickbait incentives. But we could go through each one if you want.
Do you feel like that would help you in a sense, though, as far as, and this is the thing I love about all of this. I can't even. And I know you don't care about this stuff, but it really bothers me that you and I disagree on many different issues out there, but we've remained respectful through our disagreements. I see stuff now to where if I even have you on the podcast or the show, instantly people say, well, I'm not going to support John. He's talking to Dan, yada, yada, yada. And no one is willing to actually just listen. Even if you disagree, you can still have a very civil discussion and conversation about why two people disagree. But to me, it's mind-blowing in the level of cultism now to where you can't even talk to someone that you disagree with and try and have a mutual understanding. It doesn't mean you're going to agree with each other, but it means you could at least have a civil discussion. And I can at least understand, because the thing I've learned about you, though, is there are things that we disagree on, but I can understand the logic behind why you think and do and say the things that you do. Case in point, I saw Dan Bongino go after you, and I'm not a Bongino. I don't listen to Bongino. I don't take in a lot of people's content because I like to kind of keep myself on my own, do my own thing. But when you were campaigning for Luttrell, and you talked about Kitzinger's voting record, and then you compared it to members of the Freedom Caucus. Instantaneously, Bongino went after you, and he essentially referenced a report that is ran by the Blaze, the Liberty Report. And I'm sitting here, and I'm like, okay, well, let's look into this. And what you had said was Kitzinger has a voting record that was 99% in line with the Trump agenda under Trump's administration. Bongino went after you and said that you were trying to say that Kitzinger was some kind of bedrock sound Republican. So
he made points I wasn't making.
Exactly. So it seems like when people come after you, I'm sitting there, I'm like, wait, Crenshaw didn't say that. He said that Kitzinger's voting record, and you were talking about actors within the GOP that essentially are saying one thing and then voting a different way, and Kitzinger was kind of like the opposite effect of that, and people just didn't see the point that you were trying to make was you weren't saying Kitzinger was some kind of diehard Republican. You're saying based upon his actions and his voting record, he was a Trump supporter. Am I misinterpreting that, or is that what you were meaning?
No, that's exactly right. And that was like a 10-minute talk, and this is a good one to debunk as well. Notice that, I would say almost, but notice almost zero members of the Freedom Caucus reacted to that. There's a few reasons for that. One, I talked to them. One, we're friends. And two, they knew I wasn't really referring to them. So what I was doing in that little talk there was reacting to the previous week, the previous week when a couple members, who I think aren't even members of the Freedom Caucus, members and media outlets straight up lied about this bill that we voted on vaccine databases. Mm-hmm. So this is another lie that continuously gets spread, that we voted for vaccine databases and 80 or however many Republicans voted for it. They're trying to track you. Mm-hmm. This just isn't true. I mean, it's just flat out false. Mm-hmm. This was a very non-controversial bill that had made it out of committee with 0 votes against it. Mm-hmm. It's unanimously supported. And it actually put better federal restrictions on what states can do with money to update their IIS systems. Mm-hmm. IIS is Immunization Information Systems. Mm-hmm. You always have had one in every state that you live in, and they cannot track your personal information. And in fact, the Republicans who pushed that bill put language in there to ensure that, because that language wasn't there before. Mm-hmm. So that's the truth behind that one that drove everybody crazy. So I was reacting to that, and I was explaining to that audience. And by the way, that audience was very much a Tea Party kind of audience. Mm-hmm. Nobody in there took it to mean that I was attacking the Freedom Caucus. Not a single person, mm-hmm. Because they heard the whole thing. Mm-hmm. And the only time I mentioned the Freedom Caucus was sort of as an aside, right? Because when I talk, John, and you and I talk, I like to have intellectual discussions. I like to have almost academic discussions, and I will point things out to people. And mm-hmm. I was just pointing out the voting records. Mm-hmm. Like, things aren't always what they seem. It's the point I'm making. But I wasn't talking. But when I was talking about what I think are opportunists on the right, mm-hmm. I wasn't talking about the Freedom Caucus.
Right.
Doesn't mean there's not members in there that I think that applies to. Mm-hmm. But everybody knows.
It seems like no matter what you say, though, that there's such a negative association bias with your name among certain conservative movements that regardless of the point that you're making, even if it's right, they're going to try and twist it. And I've fallen for this a few times in regards to things that I've seen come out that a lot of influencers will push out there saying this person voted for this. And then you actually, like even Bongino's example was like, that's actually incorrect. As like if we're talking about trying to be truthful on certain topics and get to the core root of the point that's being made, it seems as if we're focusing so much on the cosmetics and not the overarching point that people continue to miss. And instead, it's just mired in controversy. Because again, like I did it on the show. I brought up the fact of what you said. It's like, look, I don't get where Bongino's getting this. Like, I watched the clip. I sat there and I looked at it. I was like, I get the point that he's making. He's saying that he's not saying that Kitzinger's like a stand-up Republican or anything. He's just basically saying based upon the voting record. And it seems to me that, and I actually had to pull the information. I did it live on the show. I said, look, this, I think it was the website 545, I think it was. And the thing I like 538, yeah. And on 538, and this is what I've told the listeners to go do. It's like, regardless if you agree or disagree with me, go look it up for yourself and see for yourself the voting record of your members of Congress. And that one, like, my God, you can't even say anything now that you can say, like, hey, I disagree with Dan Crenshaw on this. And everybody's like, oh, yeah. And they say, well, I agree with him on this. It's like, oh, no, you're just a traitor. You're a turncoat. You're this, that, and the other. And it's like, Jesus Christ. Like, I thought the ultimate goal here was to pursue the truth, regardless of which side that truth falls on. And it seems to me as if it's turned into
there's always this tendency. Like I said, I'd hate to reduce it to just it's clickbait, and it's a desire to distinguish oneself. Mm-hmm. And it's a very prevalent desire on the right. I guess it happens on the left as well. Some people will try to label themselves as more progressive than they're turncoat Democrats, and they've sort of turned on each other, but nowhere near the level that happens on the right. And when you really dive into something with somebody and say, what is it that Dan said or supported that you don't like? Mm-hmm. I promise you 100% of the time it will be something that's not true. Mm-hmm. It'll just be not true or taken out of context or mischaracterized. And like we've already gone through a couple examples here. Mm-hmm. Of these sort of manufactured controversies, these manufactured divisions that are just utterly strange and obsessive. But you see the same thing happen to McCarthy, obviously McConnell, anyone whose name you recognize, and in my case, one of the reasons too is because I will not be controlled, mm-hmm. and I think that annoys people. Mm-hmm. And what I tell people on the right oftentimes is it's very easy to lie to you. It's the easiest thing in the world to tell you exactly what you want to hear. It is no secret exactly what you want to hear. But if I disagree on something, or if I have a different take on something, or if I want to challenge what I think is a false narrative, then I'll do it. And you can't control me. And I think that annoys some people to a great extent. I will say it's also a bit manufactured. It's loud. It's loud on certain veins of the internet, but in normal life, in my polling and everything else, it has zero effect. So we don't we don't worry about it too much, but still important to correct the record on a few things. Like
there is one topic that I definitely want to get straight from the horse's mouth on this one. It wasn't very long ago that Nancy Pelosi was asked a question in regards to sitting members of Congress, or should they be allowed to have direct involvement in the trading in the stock market and things such as that. And she said, yes, it's a capitalist society. She supports that. And there was an article that was just published about yourself. I'm pretty sure you're probably aware of this. It basically talked about, I'd seen some Turning Point people posting about this and said, this is coming from Texas Signal, saying Dan Crenshaw stock trading yielded the 5th highest return in Congress, basically pointing out that your campaign had received a donation from Boeing. They had lobbied, things such as that. Where do you stand on the twofold question? Do you believe that sitting members of Congress should be allowed to trade in the stock market, even though you kind of have direct insight and somewhat control over how that flow goes and which government-favored corporations? You get where I'm going. Let's start with that one first. Where do you stand on that?
I mean, I think it'd be fine if you wanted to ban individual stock trading. Notice I said individual stocks.
Right.
What of course,
as opposed to what?
As opposed to ETFs, indexes. I'm kind of neutral on it. Like, if you want only millionaires and billionaires to run for Congress, then keep making sure that we can't raise our pay, that we can't get a housing stipend, that we have to just spend or pay rent in 2 different places. That's fine. If you want to, if that's what you want to support, but just keep in mind that no one will run for Congress because you have no way to better yourself.
But do you feel like being as a member of Congress is something that you should be bettering yourself as, or are you elected to serve the people?
Well, you got to at least be able to take care of your family. There's a reason that so many members sleep on the couch in their office. And is that what you want in the people's house? You want people just sleeping in their office because they can't afford rent in D.C.?
So let me understand this, because I feel like this is a question a lot of people don't understand. So I think the initial starting salary of a congressperson is $175,000 a year, correct? Right. Roughly. Okay, so then you have your location in Texas, and then you also have to travel to D.C. to represent in Congress. Right. That means you have to pay for your own flights, food, everything. You're not getting per diem.
Well, you do have to pay for your own flights if it's not directly coming from your district. So, like, you can't go visit family somewhere else and then fly to D.C. and have that officially paid for. So you get a budget. What's called an MRA, which I can't even remember what that stands for. But that budget allows you to pay your staff, lease office space in the district, and pay for flights and other official business. If there's an official event that you're throwing, for instance, we do a healthcare innovation summit every year. That's an event that we put on from the official office. And what you don't get is, but there's no stipend associated with this. Like, so here's another thing. If a federal worker is based in D.C. And they travel for work to either let's say they're a congressional House worker, staffer. Let's say they travel to the district. Let's say federal workers travel wherever they travel. They're always going to get some kind of stipend for that, right? It's just like the military, and it's just not something that happens here. So that's why people end up sleeping in their office. Like if you have kids and you're a normal human being, then it's not very affordable. Now let's go back to this stock thing. Like, you want to ban stocks? Fine, ban stocks. I don't really care. I have very little invested. What they fail to point out is the actual absolute dollar amount that we're talking about here. So 2 things. One, we're talking about $20,000. That's how much we're talking about from these stupid articles.
That you made.
That what?
That you okay?
That I even invested that year, and I did really well because I bought the dip. I mean, it's really not any more complicated than that. You buy the dip and then you sell it.
But can you understand though how it looks very weird that we're talking about like companies like Boeing and things such as that you am I wrong on that you bought into Boeing?
Yeah. I think I bought. Yeah. It was about $2,000 worth.
But you can see the optic on this, though,
Yeah.
because what if it had been
I
more,
guess.
though?
Yeah. I mean,
What
I can kind of see it, but if I'm going to be accused of some kind of insider trading, I'd like a little bit more evidence than you bought a stock. I mean, and bought very little of that stock. You know, I'm not gonna be accused of something that has with zero evidence backing it. And when you're comparing me to people who make hundreds of thousands of dollars, millions of dollars,
Trading,
those are the members on that list. Whereas I'm literally a guy who trades on my TD Ameritrade app, just like every other guy in their 30s. And it's almost embarrassingly small how much I'm trading. Just because percentage wise beat the market doesn't mean there's some kind of corrupt effect there. But I mean, but to your initial question from a policy perspective, if you just want to do away with this controversy every time somebody reports their stock earnings, then sure. I mean, ban individual stock trades. I mean, I think that's what McCarthy said. Also worth noting, the largest part of my purchase was just buying the index, the SPY. So, you know, there's I buy very, very little individual stocks. And sometimes they do okay, sometimes they don't. Anyway, I mean, people can assume all sorts of conspiracies again because it's good clickbait. But
I mean, even still, though, you have to admit, it's almost like just the optics of it. Like, I'll be honest with you, even me seeing something like that as sitting members of Congress, like people went crazy when Pelosi was doing it, that you could have almost a way to manipulate the system as a sitting member of Congress. Which could allude to the idea of insider trading.
I don't think we have nearly as much power or insight as you're assuming. I think that's also maybe why I don't quite get it. But I do understand that people believe that. The truth of the matter is our interactions with these industries are extremely limited.
What about the lobbyists?
Extremely. Sorry?
What about lobbyists?
Well, lobbyists aren't telling us anything. I mean, again, the lobbyists also have very little power or access. You know, there's some members that meet a lot with lobbyists, and I meet probably less than most. But again, there's not some. I understand because people don't know, and so when they don't know, they assume the worst.
Have you met with any Boeing lobbyists?
I'm sure they've been at our events. Yes, I'm sure of it. But does that mean that they're giving me some inside info? I mean, no, it'd be illegal.
That's the point that I'm trying to make, though. You say what you say, but it's kind of like, what are the people supposed to believe, though? I mean, the optics are everything. Perception is reality in this world that we live in, and it doesn't really look good. And I understand how you say that you're not controlled, you're not going to bend the knee and stuff like that, but I can almost kind of understand why people are alluding to the things that they're thinking based upon what they're seeing. Does that make sense?
I get it. I already agreed with you on that. I mean, I understand the optics. I'm just telling you what the truth is. So there's optics and then there's truth.
It feels like there's a lot of optics getting pushed mainstream that essentially are turning a lot of fellow GOP people against one another, as well as yourself, from what I'm seeing on social media. But again, you said the polling in your district shows something completely different then, correct?
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't worry me as far as, you know, the people who actually know me. There's always going to be very loud segments on Twitter, social media. It's kind of what it's for. But it's not real life. Over and over again, you know, I've dealt with this a number of times so far in my short career. And it's usually led by somebody new each time. And then it goes away and everything is the same. You know, I do think there's certain people you just can never please. There's some people who want to feel victimized, who want to feel like everybody's against them, who want to feel like every single false narrative is indeed true. And you know, I can't please everybody. And I will always push back against narratives that I think are false. Tell you why. And if that makes you angry, it makes you angry. But you know, it's a tough thing to disabuse people of illusions that they hold on to dearly.
It seems like social media only exacerbates.
I'm just going to tell you how it is every time.
Regarding moving on to Liz Cheney right now, she continues to kind of be in the spotlight in regards to the January 6th investigations. you made a tweet that basically said that she, you support her, things like. Do you still believe that Trump was responsible for the rioting that happened on January 6th?
This tweet was like floating around recently because some idiots posted it.
Did you tweet it though?
Tweet. Yeah, it's a very, very old tweet. It was during the time when everybody still supported her, when she won back her conference chair seat. So, and then
they're using it in the wrong context. They're using it more as if you're supporting Liz Cheney for her January 6th investigations.
Right, of course.
So officially then
the context.
Okay, so then that's, I can understand that. But so where do you stand now then in regards to twofold, Liz Cheney and then the Trump riot / insurrection? Where do you stand on this? Because I want to hear it directly from you. I get it from all different sides. I've seen the tweet. And I'm like, okay, well, what is it? Where do you stand?
Well, it's nothing to do with Liz Cheney. I mean, I stand the same place that I've always stood on this particular issue.
Well, I think one leads to the other. Do you support Liz Cheney's?
On this.
Okay.
Wait, sorry.
Do you support Liz Cheney's stance on, again, the impeachment of Trump, pushing forward with that? I mean,
if I supported that, then I would have impeached him. So, of course I don't support that. Again, at the time, the entire conference voted to put her back as conference chair, because there is a belief that if you taking a vote of conscience should not be direct. There shouldn't be direct punishment involved with that. The problem with what Liz did after that is she just kept pushing the issue, and that's why she lost her conference chair seat. So, and I definitely don't. And if I supported the commission, John, then I would have voted for it, but I voted against it.
Yeah, and people don't talk about that
because it's a partisan commission. So, but again,
which it feels like it's a demon hunt right now.
I won't lie and say January 6th was some tourist attraction,
right?
Because it wasn't,
right.
But also, I do agree that the Democrats have taken this to a whole new level of political opportunism.
Do you think Trump was responsible for January 6th?
Well, I mean, no, he did not incite violence, right? He did not incite. I don't think he ever said we want people to go into the Capitol. I think what happened is you had a group of angry people that got out of hand. I don't think January 6th is any more complicated than that. And I'm happy to, and I think they should be punished accordingly for that. I think they deserve a quicker due process. And
because right now there's political prisoners that apparently Marjorie Taylor Greene went in there, investigated there, and they're being treated. Their rights have been violated. Essentially, they are being treated worse than freaking third-class citizens. What's the status on this? Because I know Trump's not going to touch this. If Trump goes near that, it's going to create the optic that Trump was in favor of January 6th by showing sympathy to those that broke the law. But what's going on with these political prisoners that essentially are being silenced, solitary confinement, things such as that? I mean, what's going on with this? Why is there not more eyes on this?
Well, I'm not sure. I don't have that information really, but I do agree that people deserve a swift trial. That is a constitutional obligation.
Right.
It speaks to a larger problem probably throughout the country, not just these particular inmates. So, I don't have a lot of information for you there. But again, going back to the main crux of it, one of the reasons I'm against the commission too is because there's no mysteries here. There's this idea that there's all these mysteries, like it's just like a 9/11 commission, and that we need to solve it through this commission, through these investigations. But I just don't see that. I mean, what I've always said is that people were wrongly told that January 6th was this reckoning day for them. Like this was a day that they could win and turn things around, but it was never that. And anyone who was perpetuating that lie helped rile these people up to this point.
In a sense of like by protesting the outcome or the counting of the electoral votes, you could change the sway of how everything was going to go.
Right. That was always a false belief because it's completely unconstitutional. There is no power that the Congress holds to reverse that election. And it was this idea was perpetuated that indeed there is this power, but there's not.
Or Trump was saying that basically pushed the elections back down to state level, or the counting of, or I forget how it was exactly. Like because when I know there was
the theory makes no sense because the Constitution is extremely clear on what happens,
right? And
the counting of the electoral votes in the Congress is largely ceremonial. And this belief that this is like the last place where I mean, imagine if that were true. We would just be a British Parliament. That's all that would happen. We would just be a British Parliament where we kind of vote on the on who's going to be the prime minister.
I think a lot of this was fueled by the accusations of voter fraud, things such as that, saying the whole system is rigged. This is our last opportunity to make our last stand and stand for what we believe in. It felt like one thing fueled the other.
Of course. Yeah, of course. But I think it was when we would talk about January 6th in particular, it was specifically this idea that Congress could overturn it. That is, I think, what riled everybody up. So my point is there's no mysteries here.
It feels like the Democrats are on a witch hunt right now. To feel like a 2020.
I talked about supporting Liz Cheney in, over a year at this point. So, I mean, look, there's a coordinated smear campaign going on, John, right now, and there's a lot of money behind it.
This is the other part of politics that I wanted to. Yeah, I wanted to get into this with you. Let's circle back around to this.
Circle back
to bring up 2022 midterms, and I do want to come back to what we just previously discussed. The Democrats, it feels like the January 6th is serving as a witch hunt to try and fuel a voter base energizing type of narrative to where they get more turnout in 2022, because I think Democrats are honestly very scared for what's going to happen, because historically speaking, Red's going to come back and take over for a little bit, vice versa. But with the January 6th witch hunt that's currently going on, and the tweets that Trump had made during the riot, and then Twitter popped them, banned them instantly. If Republicans do manage to take back Congress by and large, do you feel that something more, because remember you and I had a discussion a long time ago about social media censorship and how it's gone so far off the reservation to the point now where it's like, do you feel like Republicans need to step up now and do something more? Because this is the one thing that I'll be fair on. People come after you because you do have name recognition. It's like, well, what the fuck are you doing? Yeah, it's like, well, what can I do? We are outnumbered in Congress. We can't do anything. That's how Congress works. But if Republicans take control, what do you think the priority needs to be in regards to Republicans going after fair social media, uncensorship, things like the January 6th investigation? Like, where do you think Republicans need to go in that direction if they do get control?
We already have all these bills. I mean, I'm currently drafting a bill that makes a small tweak to Section 230 that basically eliminates political discrimination as far as protection from liabilities, if that makes sense. Because Section 230 is basically a liability protection section. Now, you can't get rid of it. You get rid of it, and you'll probably get more censorship.
How so? Like, explain that for me, please.
So there's one of two directions that a company can take. So if a social media company, if you eliminate Section 230, there's one of two directions. Either they censor everything so that they're never liable for anything, or they censor nothing, and it becomes basically an unusable platform. Because even Parler and these systems, they censor quite a bit of things. Like you don't want pictures of poop showing up on your screen constantly. So they have to have some kind of content moderation.
Yeah.
As soon as you do that, you're then liable, right? And so you remove Section 230, you create this binary choice. And if you think Facebook are just going to let their business models fail, you're crazy. No, they're just going to hire more people and censor more. And there's pretty widespread agreement on that from the legal kind of expertise on this. So there's a variety of bills that we've drafted in the Energy and Commerce Committee, because that's the jurisdiction for this. That would deal with this. And
so you feel a step in the right direction is to basically go after political discrimination.
That's just one bill. There's a lot of different ideas that hit at different aspects of this, I think. But I think that's the biggest thing. I also think there's a case to be made that there's bad business practices happening, and consumer protection law would be another avenue I think we could take. Although that might be better suited for the courts, like a really smart lawsuit that people get behind, and bring this up to the Supreme Court. The basics of it are this: Facebook is telling you that you come on your platform, and these are your user terms or community guidelines, and then they don't apply those guidelines fairly or universally or neutrally. You could argue that this is a bad business practice, that they're selling you a false bill of goods, that it's false advertising. So that would be another aspect that I think we would look at.
Where else do you think that the GOP should go come 22 midterms if they do wind up taking over, as far as just beyond social media? What other directions do you think Republicans should be going in regards to, well, say, for example, let's talk about this real quick. The Supreme Court came down and essentially smashed Biden's vaccine mandates, which I kind of think he knew was going to happen. There was no way that was going to stand the test of time. But the one thing that was very angering for me was that they still allowed it to go forth for healthcare professionals. And you and I have had discussions in regards to the past of standing for liberty and things such as that. How is this right? Like, how can anybody have faith in the SCOTUS when you essentially say it's wrong for this group of people, but it's okay for this group of people, especially in the face of the new science? It says, oh, by the way, if you have had COVID, you've got the antibodies, you're probably even better to repel COVID than actually getting the vaccination. So with all this information, you got Justice Sotomayor, who's basically saying, we have hundreds of thousands of children in the hospital, which is not true. Like, where do we stand on this? Like, where do you stand on this?
Yeah, I mean, well, I agree. I put out I put out a succinct explanation of this on social media a couple of days ago, explained to people why the SCOTUS did what it did and why it's wrong. So the reasoning they're using, and Brett Kavanaugh was one of them, and he should not have voted this way, because I don't see how you can vote one way for OSHA but not this second way for the HHS. Now these are, because the reason I say OSHA and HHS is because these were regulations that were derived from those two different federal agencies. HHS being Health and Human Services. That's why that applies to healthcare workers. And so the main crux of both arguments was, what was the intent of Congress? That was the question these justices were asking. Did Congress authorize this at all? And if not, because of separation of powers, the executive cannot do it. I think they should have gone further and said that there's, even if Congress did authorize it, that it would be an overstep of individual liberty, but they didn't. They just simply said Congress didn't authorize it. And so it was very obvious that Congress never authorized anything close to what OSHA was trying to do. They tried to say that they did authorize something close to what HHS was trying to do with healthcare workers, because there's language in certain statutes that talk about the general the general well-being of healthcare workers, et cetera. This is something, I'm not getting the language exactly right, but it's something very vague.
The gist of,
like that. And they're using that to suggest that Congress has therefore authorized something as extreme as forcing vaccinations. And that's just not true. That's a bad argument. So I'm working on a bill right now. It's called the No Mandates for Healthcare Workers Act, which would make it clear that we do not support this. Now, will Democrats take it to a vote? No, of course not.
Exactly. So, I mean, realistically, you can create these bills, but it's not going to go anywhere until you have Republican control again. But even with that being said, though, I do have to ask from a legal standpoint, say like you crafted this bill, you get it into Congress. Once SCOTUS has already ruled on this, how does that circumvent their ruling?
Well, because the role of the courts is to interpret law. And if we don't like how they've interpreted it, we change the law. But only a legislature can do that.
Right. Even after a SCOTUS ruling?
100%. Yeah. Especially because that ruling was based on
a previously written law.
Congress's
or mandate.
Intent was.
Mandate.
Right. It was based on this idea that Congress intended this through law. So if we change that, then the SCOTUS has to agree with that. The Congress does have the most power. It just so happens that it's deeply divided and hard to get things through, which is good. I mean, for the thing that has the most power, you should be pretty damn happy about the fact that it moves like molasses. There's a reason the Build Back Better plan is dead. It's because our system is not designed for drastic change. And even with majorities in both chambers and the presidency,
I think
they cannot get through their agenda.
Had a lot to do with that. Sinema and what's-his-face had a lot to do with that, though, as far as their votes, where like they're
100%.
They're like the greatest players we've got right now, because thank God for opposition to their own. I mean, I got to respect that. I respect the fact that Manchin and Sinema essentially are going against their own party and saying this isn't right, which I never would have thought I'd see happen, but I have to respect that move. Even as Democrats, it's good to see somebody actually snap and say, hey, we don't need to be spending this much money. This is ridiculous. It seems as if we're in this mindset we can print, spend. And meanwhile, like even under Trump, it continued to grow. Like if you looked at the federal budget, you look at the deficit, it's like, good grief. Like he was not a fiscally conservative president, and the facts prove otherwise. And it's interesting to see people actually like do that and stand up against how far the left has gone in regards to just spending, things such as that. Like, I got to actually sit down with Tulsi Gabbard and have a very good conversation with her. And she's one of the very few Democrats that I look at. And it's like, I asked her, it's like, why are you a Democrat? Like, and I'm not saying you should be a Republican. It's like, but a lot of what you say makes sense in regard. But I don't agree with her on her Second Amendment stance. She does favor a few socialist programs I don't agree with. But she seems more moderate, more that would be willing to come to the table and actually negotiate things. Because there's been a lot of Republicans that said, hey, if she would run as a Republican, I'd probably vote for her. Even as a Democrat, there have been a lot of Republicans saying I would probably vote for her.
Yeah, I mean, she's an independent thinker. She's a friend.
Yeah. Well, she brought your name up, too. She said that you're a really good guy.
Yeah. Yeah, I like Tulsi a lot. Like, I like anybody who's intellectually honest. And I think we should be far more skeptical of people who basically read from a hymnal. And
like a political hymnal,
because those are the very same people, by the way, that will label themselves the most conservative, like the best conservatives. It's, again, don't be easy to lie to.
Right.
It is very easy for me to be popular with this group that's mad at me now. It's very easy to be popular with them. There's a very specific things that you can just say and just agree with, and you'll be good. But if you don't, they'll try to cancel you, especially if you've got high name ID.
No, I've noticed that. Even regardless of you, in fact, like, I won't do anything with Turning Point. They are Trump loyalists at the core. And I've been saying this for years. I wouldn't get involved with them. I had a lot of issues with them. I don't go down that road, but you get where I'm going. It feels as if, like, you don't toe the party line on one side or the other, they're going to ostracize you. They're going to say you shouldn't have a voice. I mean, there have been people calling for you to be deplatformed. It's like, well, then how can you sit there and say that you're for free speech, and then you have someone you dislike and you want them deplatformed?
It's a clown show, man. It's all getting so damn ridiculous. And I have nothing against Turning Point. I don't think it's the Turning Point organization. It just so happens that a lot of there's some bad actors that associate themselves with Turning Point, and the MAGA movement, by the way, but. And they sort of have cloaked themselves in this movement, which I think is a good movement. But I think there's bad actors that have cloaked themselves within it, and like they're rabble rousers, they're provocateurs at heart. And people, and it's easy to fall for their con. And it's
con being what? I mean, are we talking about as far as like them pretending to be a Republican? Like, what are we talking about per se? You don't have to give names, but I'm asking, like, what do you mean per se?
I mean, it's hard to say because I'm not sure how they really label themselves. I mean, let me look at my past enemies for instance, like these guys like Nick Fuentes and Michelle Malkin who've come after me, and now there's just a whole new generation of them now, and like what did they really believe? Well, in those cases, they were extreme anti-Semites. And so there was a weird time, and they were going after Charlie Kirk too. They're going after Ben Shapiro. These group of like mostly young guys, college-aged guys that probably followed the alt-right movement when that was a big thing, and now they follow what was called the Groyper movement. And I think their main concern was Israel. They hate Israel. But they wear MAGA hats. And Trump
was pro-Israel.
Right. So like when I say they sort of cloak themselves in the movement, I mean that quite literally. They'll come to these rallies and they would yell at me, they'd yell at Charlie Kirk, they'd yell at Ben Shapiro. But they would wear MAGA hats while they did it, to cloak themselves in like an America First kind of nationalist sort of narrative, when in fact it seems like their main objective was to be provocative, to gain attention, and to gain a following as such. And it's just what I'm always telling people. You just got to look out for that. Look out for what somebody's incentives are. Is it purely monetary? There's I mean, look, there's a lot of people who have purely monetary incentives that are great people. But it certainly isn't my incentive. And everybody's like, yeah, it is. You just line your pockets. And I'm like, no, I don't get to line my pockets. It's just not true. And I understand people want to believe these sort of things about fat cat, corrupt politicians and all that. I think that was true in the past. I think a lot of rules have made that a thing of the past, which is a very good thing.
Well, I think a lot of what
transparent for what we do.
I think a lot of things that work against you though are people that are already doing it or have done it. You take for example, like Again, Nancy Pelosi, who just buys like $1 million something mansion down in Florida, which is kind of ironic to me. It's like that's not even your district, but you claim to be against these states that are pro-freedom, pro-anti-mandates, things such as, and then you want to move, like, AOC goes down there on vacations. It's like, it doesn't make sense to me that if you are so against these states that are for pure freedom, why are you visiting there? But the point that I'm trying to make, though, is when Pelosi can afford these $1 million places, or Bernie Sanders, who has 3 or 4 different houses, it does beg the question, where are you getting this money from that you can afford such a thing? And I know it goes in more detail as far as like their spouse might work as well. But again, the optics of it don't look good.
I think Nancy, there are good reports that show that Pelosi has indeed potentially acted with insider trading. I can't prove it. But there was obviously some strange coincidences. And so if there's strange coincidences that you want to point out, then, I think that's a worthy thing. And I would never trust Nancy Pelosi. So I'm not sure she's the best example, because I think these things might actually apply to her. I'm just talking about members more generally. Like, again, if you're going to accuse me of corruption, then you better have some evidence, and at least say all the facts. Which is, out of that list of people who beat the market, I probably had the least amount of trades and least absolute value of, monetarily speaking.
They say you're number 5 on the list. I'm looking at the list right here. This is from, again, that Texas Signal. And here's the thing. I don't know who this is. I don't know if this is an accurate report, but it said, this is from John Ossoff, who says, tonight I introduced legislation to ban members of Congress and or spouses from trading stocks. 3/4 of Americans agree. And he quotes unusual_whales, where basically says members of Congress that beat the SPY in 2021. And it says you're 5th on that list, all red at the top, and then Nancy Pelosi right below you. Is there truth to this? Like, because they phrase it in a way, it's like
maybe, because I did well. I bought the dip. I bought the index in March, sold it sometime later the next year, and you make a profit, but like that profit's maybe total $20,000 total. From reading these reports, you think I'd made millions, hundreds of thousands of dollars.
That's exactly how they come off, though, because they don't list any actual price points.
BS.
They say there's
complete BS, and it's like, you know what? If you want to ban stock trading, fine. If everybody agrees with that, fine. I don't really care. I'm kind of a neutral on it. I have very little investment in stocks, as shown by these absolute values. I have very, very little investment. I don't care. Ban them. Ban it. Like, it's just what I try to tell people is, and this makes people mad because you don't want to challenge people's illusions. It makes them mad. I'm just saying, this isn't going to solve anything for you. It's like, you want term limits on politicians? Sure, fine, I'll support it. But I'm not going to lie to you and tell you that it's going to solve a single problem that you're worried about. There's a lot of popular ideas and popular narratives that people love to cling to that have no effect on the actual government or the actual problems that you care about, and certainly not part of the solutions.
You don't think term limits would be a fix to a lot of these problems, like no more career politicians that can come in there and then essentially have your Joe Bidens that essentially come in there for years and nothing really, and I don't like generalizing and saying nothing really gets done, because it's not on the individual. The individual has no power. It comes to the collective unit. But even with that being said, you don't feel like actually putting term limits on, because if we look at the founding of our nation, our forefathers didn't even want to serve in Congress, because essentially at home their farms suffered. Essentially what they wanted to do was make the best that they could for their country, their demographic, and then go back home and then just leave it be. It seems as if now we've got career politicians that essentially, and I like Milton Friedman's idea in regards to, a congressman or woman's salary should be based upon their district's GDP, to where it's like, if your district is doing garbage, you're getting paid garbage. You don't think that'd be a fix?
No, I think that's, again, if you only want millionaires to run for Congress, then that's what you would do. Because then you will never have regular people running for Congress, especially from a poor district. I mean, that's but back to term limits. Look, I support term limits. But I just won't lie to you about them. Right. I think this is what makes people so mad about me, like, because they're like, just say what I want you to say, and I'm like, no, I won't. I won't.
Okay.
I'm just going to tell you the truth. I'm just going to tell you the truth.
That's one thing that I've said, though. So will you explain that for me then? Like we say, and I don't mean to put you on the spot here. You talk about individual examples, but I am a firm believer that term limits, I'm not going to say it's going to solve government's problems.
I'm going to explain it. No, I'm going to explain it to you.
Go ahead.
So what I tell people is, okay, do you want me term limited? Because like U.S. term limits, they advocate for only 6 years. So I'm like, okay, I got one term limit left, or one term left. And I asked my supporters, is that what you guys want? They're like, no. I'm like, but you want Nancy Pelosi out, right? Yes, exactly. That's what we're talking about. And I'm like, okay, fair enough. But do you think that some moderate, sensible, reasonable Democrat is going to replace Nancy Pelosi? Hell no. It's going to be some pink-haired, like AOC plus. All right, that's the truth. So it's not going to solve your problems. And here's what it will create. This is what people don't realize about how Washington works. You need some seasoned members of Congress. One, they know how to play things.
The game. Yeah.
I mean, they have experience. Like, I talked to some of these old boring guys that everybody calls rhinos because they're boring and they don't stand up and they don't have backbone. But these guys are smart and they know legislation. They're the ones you have to rely on to actually get to the solutions that you want. And they know that 10 years ago, Democrats tried to play this same trick, you know, whatever that trick is, right? But we wouldn't know that without these guys.
Right.
And so, you know, some appreciation for some experience might be a good thing here. And it's also worth noting, if you just have this constant turn of uneducated, inexperienced members of Congress, who has all the power? Staff and the executive branch. Because when we write letters to the executive branch, and we do it all the time, and you either have some sway with that or you don't. And you certainly don't if they know that you're gone in a couple of years.
Right.
So, you know, I always encourage people to stop and think about the actual ramifications. And John, I would note that in the state that we live in, Texas, we've never had term limits. And Texas runs pretty well. So it's just, look, it makes people feel good, so I support it. That's it. Not 6 years. I think 12 years is more reasonable for a House member. But and maybe 18 for a senator. But, you know, you have to run elections every 2 years. And
it almost seems, though, as if, like,
you're constantly in the spotlight.
Well, it seems like you get a lot of Mitt Romneys, though, that essentially are like Republican light or Democrat light, that they campaign one way and then they go in there and they vote a completely different way and they continuously get reelected and they just move to a different district. We've seen it multiple times, and it seems like that would also
see if Romney. I'm very curious if Romney gets reelected in Utah, because he has taken some. You're right. I mean, he's taken some votes that I'm not sure Utah agrees with, but maybe they do. We'll see when they vote again. You know, I mean, it's you know, 6 years. Yeah, if you're a senator, yeah, you got a little bit longer.
Right.
But you can't afford to do that in the House. And it's not designed that way. The House is designed as this sort of national body that is really the will and the emotions and the whims of the people. And you can see that reflected in the House. It's much more chaotic.
What would you say in regards to the Senate then?
The Senate it's based upon the sort of the House of Lords model from the UK. It's meant to be this cooling off zone. We've since put rules in the Senate like the filibuster that enforce that sort of cooling off mechanism.
Right.
It's supposed to be more cordial, and the reason they have longer terms is to deliberately disassociate them from those emotional passing whims that can occur in politics.
Right.
So it's a very unique balance that we have in America that we should appreciate more. And again, I think conservatives are appreciating it right now because we've seen the Build Back Better plan just get absolutely demolished.
I think a lot of it, though, like what we talked about last time, that when excuse me, when you first took office, you did a lot of educating, saying, you know, it was almost like a Schoolhouse Rock version of Congress, which I would love to see you do more of, because just sitting here talking to you about your insight in regards to the House versus the Senate, it's very insightful, and I do like that you make some good points in regards to seasoned members of Congress. I still got to think about that one, though, because it's kind of like, you know, we have secondary and tertiary effects of said things, so I can't make up my mind right away on that. But that's one thing that I think is very helpful, because I feel like a lot of people don't understand how the meat grinder works per se. We understand the very cosmetic details of it. When you get down to the nitty gritty, it's like there are some points there that I feel a lot of people don't understand, or they just not aware of.
Well, here's another example, John. Like, remember the red flag laws in the military spending bill, the NDAA?
You want to talk about that one again? I mean, I didn't want to bring it up. That's the question I get asked the most to ask. What's your stance on 2A? It's like, I've already asked him that on 2 podcasts. I'm not going to ask him this again. Like, yeah.
But we have a new thing to debunk. And, you know, part of the reason I wanted to talk to you today was just to go through the list of conspiracies about me. Because
I'm glad that's what I serve as here. I'm glad I'm the debunker. I'm like the freaking TMZ of freaking politics. I love this. Go ahead. No, go ahead.
Okay, but this is a good example of people not understanding how Congress is working. So, you know, we vote on this NDAA. It's not exactly what we want. And we had this conversation. Like, I remember having this conversation in the Texas delegation before that vote. And everybody's like, what's up with these red flag law stuff in this military spending bill? And then And then we talk about it, and it's like, yeah, this is already getting taken out. This was known, well known, that this was getting taken out for the final passage, because a bill, just because it gets passed out of the House doesn't mean it's final.
Right. This is the one that Madison Cawthorn came out as well, and basically you and him, like, people were going hardcore after you. I remember what you were talking about.
Right, and then we voted on the final bill in December, and it had none of this stuff in it. So
it was
just like we said it wouldn't, and now it's been turned into law with no red flag laws. I actually have a bill that I introduced last year to deal with all this, which is HR 5417. This is probably the only bill number that I've ever memorized. And HR 5417, which is an anti-red flag law bill that says you cannot use any federal power money for red flag laws at the federal or state level. And so I want to put that to rest once and for all.
I don't think it will. I think even you could.
It doesn't matter. People like to hear what they want to hear.
Yeah. So
but that gets to your initial question, like why we're doing this. I mean, like you as you know, like you can't convince people.
Yeah.
Sometimes, so it doesn't matter what facts you present to them. You can't. I mean, the other new thing. What? Oh, I interrupted you. What were you
No. Go ahead. Keep going. The other new thing.
Oh, the other thing that you've seen pop up is that I'm part of the secret cabal of the World Economic Forum.
Yes, that's another one I keep getting, is that you're sitting on the board. I forget the guy's name that you're supposedly in bed with financially. These are things that is like, I don't know where this is coming from, but if you want to address it, feel free. Go ahead and address it.
Well, I don't know about the board. You might be talking about two different conspiracies.
Yeah.
So because one that was being spread was about Paul Singer him being on the board of Twitter. I'm not sure if he's actually on the Twitter board or not. And because he donated to me, I think years ago. He donates to dozens and dozens of Republicans, so this isn't anything new. There was this conspiracy that I got Marjorie kicked off Twitter, right, when she was doing her like I'm a victim tour to all the radio shows. She kept spewing this particular conspiracy. It's not true. I mean, some of these things I just have to be like, I shake my head and say, man, I don't.
You've got a lot of power.
I don't even know where to go with
you
this.
can get sitting members of Congress kicked off Twitter. You have some power.
Yeah, I mean, wouldn't that be something? The other conspiracy, which has been on the internet for a while, is regarding the World Economic Forum, and this because they published my picture and name as part of their like young global leaders of 2019 kind of thing. I don't know if that was the first time they did it or what, but this appears to me to be some kind of like Forbes 30 under 30 sort of thing. I don't know much about it because they just notified us, I think at the time, that, hey, we're going to put you on the list. Like, okay, I don't even know what this is. Fine. A year later, we were like, hey, take us off this damn thing. Yeah. So I'm pretty sure you can't find me on there anymore. But people take that and they're like, oh my God, you're on the same list as Mark Zuckerberg and Soros and Tulsi Gabbard. And so you're obviously a globalist puppet.
Right.
And you're like, or maybe, yeah. So like, what's like, what's more likely here? What I just said, which is I just got put on a list because I was very famous at that time, right? It was right after SNL, it was all that, or that I secretly vote conservative, right? I have a 98% or 99% rating with Heritage, A rating with NRA, A rating with National Right to Life. All of these extremely conservative voting records, but it's all just a trick. It's all just a trick because in reality, I just support the Great Reset or something. Like, guys, like, come on, like which one is more likely here? So, it's some of these I kind of have to chuckle at because they're just a little strange. Like there's a lot of jumping to conclusions.
There's a lot of that on both sides, though, because even I see that. It's like apparently like the globalist thing I've seen levied against you, the red flag things. And the red flag thing, though, I understand. Like we talked about that before in regards to, when you were first into politics, you were first into, I don't know how much experience you have with social media, things like that. You'd made that tweet that we should have some conversations about this. But judging from how we've seen the left act in the past in regards to the Second Amendment, you can't even have a conversation because the minute you do and you give any kind of ground, we saw it with Trump and talking about, take the guns, due process second. It's like, no, that's not the way the Constitution or our founders framed that. And then, that was another thing that really angered me in regards to the NRA. They were very quiet about it. Turning Point was very quiet about it. And I'm sitting here going, wait a minute. We are either for the Constitution or we are not. So when a sitting president and organizations that supposedly take, millions and millions of donation dollars to fight for the Second Amendment, and you virtually say nothing, that was the first red flag for me, no pun intended, in regards to what money does in regards to political viewpoints concerning the Constitution. Like when the NRA, of all people, are saying nothing, it's like they should be the first ones to go after Trump and say, look, man, if you don't stop this, like you're losing our support. And that's why I lost a lot of respect for the NRA. Gun Owners of America stood up. They were very vocal about it. There was a lot of people that were actually saying, hey, Trump's wrong on this, and people should be standing up. And a lot of people did. But that's why it's kind of left a bad taste in my mouth, to where it's like, I don't think I can support a group of people that when the time came for it and it counted, they were silent. That's why it kind of aggravates me that a lot of these mandates that are coming down vaccination-wise, there are a lot of people that are quiet about it, that they're not upset about it, and they kind of play the fence-sitting role. It's like, I hate to say it, but there needs to come a time where you've got to pick a side. You've got to pick a side saying you either for liberty or you're not. And, just getting to sit there and say, I'm scared for my life, that doesn't change how things work. You don't get to sit there and say, hey, I'm going to cast aside my freedom and your freedom because I'm in fear of my life, which, by the way, again, the CDC, and I don't trust the CDC. I don't trust any of these organizations because I feel like, again, the information's been manipulated. We don't know who to trust anymore. We live in this society now to where CNN and Fox are literally, two sides of the same coin. You don't know who to believe anymore because there is so much, like we've discussed, there's so much rhetoric, there's so much optical misinformation, and we just don't know where to get the actual bona fide truth from. So it almost feels like you have to sit there and wade through all this stuff, and you still don't even know if you're getting accurate information.
Yeah, there's a lot to react to there. You got to go to Joe Rogan's podcast.
That's the other thing. Like, I mean, you want to talk about, like, and I love this. I love the fact that Joe Rogan now is destroying MSM in ratings. Like, and it's not that I'm saying Rogan is like the best, most informed guy, but the thing I respect about Rogan is he has people on and he will get the opposite side of the spectrum's opinions on stuff. And he's never claimed to be an expert. And I don't even listen to Rogan, but I appreciate what he's actually done to essentially circumvent the press. And that's why everyone's wanting to have him censored. It's like they want to shut you up if you know. I know Biden probably.
Well, I mean, he has curious conversations.
Yeah.
He's an intellectually curious individual, searching for the truth.
And there's nothing
wrong
with
those
that,
interviews. Yeah. And I think people appreciate that and like to listen to it. He's also an excellent conversationalist, so he can keep something going for 3 hours. Which is quite the feat. But as far as what to believe, I mean, geez, I get asked this question a lot. Like, where should I get my news? How am I supposed to interpret this stuff? And I guess the first thing I should say is don't search for the deepest, darkest blog on the internet to find truth, right? Because a lot of people like find some nugget of information that maybe in the comment section, again, like people, because we do interact with people on the comment section sometimes.
Yeah.
And we'll be like, what example are you talking about? Why am I a globalist? You just are. You're a shill. But what? Like, give me an example, please. Is there something that's happened or I've said or I've supported? Like, what are you talking about? They don't know because it's just this sort of repeated narrative that's parroted over and over again. It becomes people's truth.
Well, I had one friend tell me that you'd warned influencers that you had some inside information on the January 6th event. And I'm like, wait, what? It's like, where are you getting this from?
I don't know. I've heard this one too. I don't know
because it doesn't make sense to me.
Like some of this stuff, I'm just like,
it's kind of like if you had inside information and it was proven that you did and you didn't warn anybody, like you're kind of complicit, which legally they could go after you for, wouldn't they?
Oh, I haven't heard that one.
Oh yeah,
but it's another example. I mean, it's just like I will watch people be like. Commenter A. Dan, don't you know that Dan's a neocon? And then commenter B. Oh my God, I didn't. I support him so much. I've listened to everything he does, but thanks for telling me that. I didn't know that before. Yeah. I'm like, wait a second. You don't even know this person.
Yeah.
Like you just were convinced like that quick. And you can unconvince them pretty quickly as well. But I just encourage everybody to not search for the most anonymous, deepest, darkest troves of the internet for news. Look, if I look at news, what I like to point people to is the Daily Wire, National Review. National Review certainly for the more intellectual takes on conservative thought. Now, to be fair to people who are a little bit more independent-minded, lean left in some ways, lean right in other ways, it is genuinely difficult to find very neutral news. News will always have some kind of bias associated with it. The trick is to find, I think, the intellectually honest right and the intellectually honest left. And if you want to compare the two, then you can compare the two. It's a bit harder for me to know what the intellectually honest left looks like.
That was my next question. Like, who would you refer to in regards to the intellectual left? I mean, I would look at somebody like Tulsi Gabbard, but she's also not a news source. Where would you go? I mean, could you think anything off the top of your head?
No, I've never been able to give a good answer to this. You might look at The Week. It's a magazine that's published weekly that does try to compare both sides. I think it leans a little left. It's certainly not left-wing propaganda. So that might be an interesting one for people. The Atlantic can sometimes do it. I mean, of course, if you're just looking for whatever the left thinks, you can just go to their mainstream outlets like the New York Times.
It almost seems like if someone was to establish a new media platform that reported just the news, it would seem like they'd be very successful. To like, there was no political bias. It was literally just, hey, this happened today. Congress did blah, 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 yada, yada, yada. It seems like if you just reported the news and didn't put any type of opinion pieces in there, it's like, this is just, it seems like it would take off. Like, you could really do that.
Unfortunately, I disagree completely. There's a reason nobody's done it, because there's no financial incentive to do so, because people aren't curious about it. People, look, the biggest problem we have is that people are indeed searching for sensationalized headlines.
You think so?
Right? We all absolutely.
I honestly, I get your point though, but I think we've hit a point now where people are kind of like, I just want the unfiltered truth without a political spin, and that's why I don't listen to a lot of political commentators. Because I mean, the one thing I will say about Shapiro though is I do like Ben Shapiro. I do like what he says, because he is. When someone's willing to stand up and take fire for their viewpoints that go contrary to what the GOP might think, it's like, I respect that person. It's like, regardless if I agree or disagree, you're standing up against the organization and saying, I'm not going to toe the line with you. I have my viewpoints. That's why, I said I've had a lot of respect for Tulsi and her stances that she's taken. I don't agree with her on everything. But it's just kind of like, I think that, I don't know, I feel like as time progresses, there is going to be a shift to where people are getting, number one, getting tired of social media, the negativity that comes with it, and two, to get unfiltered, truthful, factual-based news. I think there could be a call for it eventually.
Look, I wish that were true. I wish that were true. I just think that there's not that many people. I think that's a minority opinion. I mean, like, everybody has that opinion, but they won't click on it.
Oh yeah.
See, that's the thing. Like, you're not wrong that everybody talks about this and everybody has this opinion and everybody wants a sensible place that they can go and just get the news.
Right.
But they won't click on it. They won't,
because they need ad revenue.
And the people in media know this.
Yeah.
And they know that to make it these days, they've got to find clickbait.
Yeah. I talked about that before in the podcast.
This podcast. It's like clickbait's a very, very powerful thing, because clickbait translates into influence and money. Okay, so
I wish I was making money off this podcast. That'd be great. This episode is brought to you by Shell Shock. I wish I was. I get accused of that all the time. It's like, you're just doing it for clickbait. It's like, on what, Instagram? I was like, you can't even share it. Like, what are you talking about? Like, I don't, like, how am I making money off of it? I wish I was. I won't lie. I wish I was. I was like, but that's also what's made me.
Some people do.
How?
They'll get, a lot of these influencers are paid.
Oh, I'm talking about like
ads and
Oh, by company. I'm talking about like via proxy of Instagram. I mean, I wish they were paying me. I would love to take Instagram money. I mean, I take YouTube money if on my YouTube channel, I'm posting stuff there. It's like, I'll take your money and I'll spend it on whatever I want to spend. But I wish I could, because I get accused of that all the time. It's like, you're doing this for clickbait. It's like, it's not clickbait if there is no, like, I don't understand that. I get accused of that all the time.
Well, I guess the way it would work is, I mean, clickbait generates more engagement, and you can show advertisers or political allies.
I think clickbait is if I'm getting
X amount of engagement.
Yeah. Well, I mean, that's the other thing that kind of irks me. It's kind of like, it's clickbait. It's like, I'm not sponsored by anybody. I don't want to be sponsored by anybody. I've worked with those groups, and it's just, when you kind of stand independent and you do your own thing fiscally, it allows you a lot more freedom to do whatever the hell you want to do. It's like, if you want to cancel me, go ahead and try and cancel me. It's not going to work. But, I do respect those that kind of do their own thing and they don't fall under, because, a lot of it comes down to who's sponsoring you. And when we talk about clickbait titles such as Fox or CNN, you're 100% on the money. That's why I feel like the MSM and social media has destroyed civil conversations, because essentially it's not going to make any money. They know that if I can get you to click on this, and a lot of people don't know this, like, that's why originally they called it clickbait. Like, I don't know if you know this or not, but I had some friends that were big on social media, YouTube and Facebook, before the adpocalypse happened. And you remember that website, Dipley? There was this website called Diply, and essentially it was just nothing but clickbait. It was stories about celebrities, and they had these massive Facebook and YouTube channels. And if they shared these posts on Facebook, this is back before they really didn't draw down your reach, and they would get shared across the board, like 20, 30,000 shares. And these guys, I talked to them after the fact, like, Burke, I was making 70 grand a month just off sharing these articles on my massive platform. And that, I felt, led into what we see now on mainstream media, to where I know, like you talked about, if there is a very misleading headline, it's going to get clicks. And as soon as you click onto that website and you see those ads, that's generating ad revenue. And people, I think, so I associated that with clickbait. So I see what you're saying as far as clickbait in regards to the sphere of influence.
And that is what you're referring to is exactly the definition as well. I'm referring to it just more generally. There's an incentive structure in politics to provoke and to go viral, right? And to get engagement.
Get the sound bites and the gotcha moments,
Negative commentary gets way more engagement than just positive feel-good stuff.
Oh, yeah.
It just does. It's just a fact. And so those incentive structures are aligned that way. And for the people trying to rise in politics, they're highly incentivized to generate very negative content and to generate controversy.
Yeah.
Which is and you can't generate controversy by talking about some Republican that nobody knows.
Yeah,
so you can only generate that controversy by talking about a Republican that everybody knows.
I know who you're talking about.
You know, so this is again, I've reduced this recent uproar to that, but I'm not sure there's any other explanation, to be honest, because we can go through every criticism of me and debunk it, and like it's just not true. I mean, it's this manufacturers division stuff is killing us on the right, and it's got to stop.
Do you think it's good though, in a sense of purging itself? Because it feels like a lot of I see Marjorie Taylor Greene. I mean, she has guts. I'll give her that. She actually stands up for what she believes. But when she talked about you, when she went after you and talked about that you're not good for the conservative brand, yada yada, I made a comment on her page. It's like, you're the one that like supported QAnon. It's like, it's very hypocritical for you to go after somebody on your own side saying you're bad for this brand, yet the things you've done were also bad for the brand. Like, I warned people for years about QAnon. It was garbage. It was a psyop. But it seems to me, is like, doesn't she realize her own hypocrisy here? Like Jewish space lasers that she talked about. Like, come on. It's like, and I'm not trying to hold that against her, because I know that, hey, sometimes we get under the sphere of influence of certain groups, and then when we're able to break away, it's like, okay, I wasn't really thinking right. But it's very hypocritical for her to come after you and say, and I do respect the fact that she has brought attention to the January 6th political prisoners, stuff like that. I do respect her for that.
Yeah, I think more than anything, she's trying to bring attention to herself, which is why she randomly came after me the other day for, and really just made something of nothing with this whole comments on what Trump's policy was versus Biden's policy. And I'll probably leave it at that.
Okay.
With respect to her. I mean, it's like these. She wants attention, and I couldn't help it. I gave her a little. Attention.
You've been a lot more.
Because I'm gonna respond. I mean, well, not always, but like every one of these. There's this other weird narrative going on right now where I'm just picking fights with people, and I'm like, who have I picked a fight with? I've responded to people. I responded to Marjorie when she was trying to slander me for no reason. I've responded to a couple people here and there, but I do not go out and pick fights with my own side. People pick fights with me because it generates clickbait, and then they play the victim when I hit them back. And I'm just not going to pander. People expect their politicians to pander to an exceptional degree, and all of these so-called fighters, they absolutely are just pandering to their particular audience. It's just not something I will ever do.
Right.
I will tell you the truth. I will tell you the truth as I see it. And if people don't like that, they don't like it. But
I've noticed in the
respond when you hit me.
I've noticed in the last few months, you've definitely gone way more aggressive in how you respond to people, or just the fact that you are responding to a lot of people. Whereas in before, it was kind of like water under the bridge. Now you're hitting back.
Yeah. Yeah, and I think there's just more hits, to be honest. They're random and they're stupid, and so I just I still choose carefully on what I'm actually going to respond to.
Do you regret ever going into politics?
It's also primary season, so there's money behind some of this stuff. John, and like there's a lot to probably uncover there.
So you feel like people are
but it is
purposely
primary
or
season.
intentionally going after you to try and smear you for fiscal or political purposes, or both? Excuse me.
Well, yes. I mean, people being paid to do it, and there's a couple different reasons for that. Yeah, that I won't get into because it involves other races that aren't even my race. But that's most likely what's going on.
Well, now you've got me curious.
I've got a lot of good word that is what's going on. So that's my point to people. Like,
are they trying to associate you with other people to try and discredit them as well?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, that's a good insight. And so there's always something more going on, you know. And I tell people, like, question who you're following. Like, who are they? What experience do they have in life? Are they just somebody who started an Instagram account where they shit talk everybody and like that's
that?
You know
well,
what I mean?
you're
Because
not far off on that. You are honestly not far off on that, because a lot of these influencers I'm personal friends with, and I'm not sitting here saying that I'm tooting my own horn. I'm not the most intelligent guy out there, but there's a lot of people that I follow that I've had to unfollow. It's like, bro, I don't know where you're coming from on this. I don't know what gives you the idea that you know what you're even talking about. I've seen so many of these influencers had peddled QAnon. And I was just like, wait, if you say that you're on the side of truth and logic, you are following a political prophet via the internet. It's like, how can you sit there and say that you are a logical, rational, independent, pragmatical thinker and you're thinking this way? It's like, it doesn't make sense to me. And then when that whole thing fell apart, none of them apologized. They just continued going down that road. And people, I mean, again, man, just the fact that I even have you on this podcast, instantly, John's a rhino now too. It's like, well, I mean, go ahead and call me a rhino because I'm not a Republican. I'm more independent. I'm more libertarian. So, I mean, it's not an insult to me. I don't fucking care. And if people are going to hate me for it, so be it. But the problem is, I feel like, and I watch something, I rarely watch Gary Vaynerchuk. Again, I don't like consuming other people's content because I like getting to certain things on my own, because that way I don't feel like I'm cheating off of other people, if that makes any sense. But Gary Vaynerchuk made a very good point. He said, essentially with social media, you have to live in a cocoon. You cannot listen to the praise and you cannot listen to the negativity, because if you do, it will warp the way you think and the way you see things and essentially deviate you from the path of figuring things out for yourself. And instead, you're taking in, I mean, if you really think about it, you take in hundreds of opinions of just various people who, like you said, you don't know who they are. I don't know who the other person is on the opposite side of that phone. I don't know what your experiences are. And that's why it's kind of like I've had to kind of pull back, stop engaging in the comments so much, stop reading the comments so much, because if you do, Jesus Christ, again, like I should probably go kill myself. The fact that I had Rhino Dan Crenshaw on the show, like, oh my God. Like it's McCarthyism 101. You can't even talk to someone on the opposite side of the spectrum, because if you do, now I'm a globalist. Or like somebody says, like, I really question you. Like, what is your ego? Like, what's your goal here? Are you really a globalist? Like, oh my God, like really?
Yeah, and if you try to push that conversation any deeper or unpack any of those layers, they cannot do it. Like, they are completely incapable of actually doing that, because there's nothing to it.
No,
and people have to stop.
Well, I mean, I wouldn't say
just because it's parroted.
I wouldn't say there's nothing to. I mean, there are instances where there is something there, but it's just like we conflate the two things to where, like, conspiracy theory has run rampant across the board to where, and again, I hate to keep going back to this, but QAnon had a lot to do with it, and that's why I kept harping on it. It's like, this is damaging the right more so than people realize.
John, keep in mind, those people have nowhere to go now, so they have you can't tell the difference now between the people who are with QAnon and who are now not, but like still within the right.
Yeah.
And so, you know, that's what I think a lot of this commentary comes from.
Well, it also got twisted, because, like, for me sitting there saying, like, I'm not anti-vax. I mean, I'm more pro. I want to see the long-term effects of this vaccination. I'm not saying that I'm against this vaccination. I mean, both of us have served in the military. We know how the military works. I think anyone that openly trusts their government is foolish. Like, there should always like I told you before, there should always be healthy levels of skepticism regards to the police, politicians, and the government. And it's not that you hate them. It's that there should never be implicit trust, because if there is, that's where the abuse comes in. When there's always a healthy level of paranoia, it's going to keep people honest for the most part, by and large, I would hope. But it feels as if
healthy
like
level.
a healthy level. It feels as if, though, it's definitely changed now, because the conspiracy theorism went from the QAnon to where now, if that you say, I question the vaccination, now you're anti-vax. And that's not the case at all. it's kind of like, I do believe vaccinations have worked many times, but they also say, well, you were in the military, as were you. It's like, well, you had vaccinations. Like, yeah, but I volunteered, and these vaccines had multiple tests and trials over a long period of time, and that's why I'm against these vaccine mandates. I'm against the enforcement of anything when it comes to that. And it's been very aggravating to see a lot of fellow Republicans or Liberty people actually say, no, I support this stuff. It's like, I don't get where you're coming from on this. Like, I just don't understand this.
Yeah, and the military one's a little more difficult because everybody has taken vaccines. But to your point, there are long-term effects that really haven't been. You have no ability to study these because they hasn't been around that long. My main point to military leaders was, whether you're right or not, you've lost the argument, and you have failed to persuade your troops. And you now have a leadership decision to make, which is you either keep pressing this and have a blow to force readiness, or you let it go, knowing full well that the risk to the force of just letting this go will be very, 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 very minimal.
When you say let it go, you mean go ahead and let the vaccinations occur, or are you talking about just not engage with it?
No, I'm saying stop, allow religious exemptions.
Right.
Allow the people who don't want to take it just to not take it. Just accept that you've kind of lost the battle here, because the alternative is this Pyrrhic victory where you make them take the vaccines, but you also kick out some very valuable members of your force, and that's just not a situation we need to be in. And so that's always been my message to military leaders: just stop, just stop what you're doing. This is not necessary to enforce this with such a high degree, and as it does turn out, like there isn't 100% vaccination mandate for most other vaccines. They usually apply to just deployments. So that's something worth noting as well.
Speaking of that, what's going on with Operation Lone Star at the southern border? I know you and I talked about it. Jesus Christ, like, you want to talk about just people like, I don't envy your position. I really don't. I brought attention to it. I forget who initially put it on my radar, but essentially there was just a lot of very bad leadership. There are massive amounts of pay issues going on with our guardsmen down at the southern border. And I had DM'd you about it, and you said you're going to look into it. You forwarded it to Greg Abbott's people and stuff like that. And instantly in the comments, like, well, where's your boy Dan Crenshaw? It's just like, it's none of your business. It's like, I don't want to publish everything and everyone I talk to about this, because then it's going to lead to, well, what is he doing? It's like, well, I don't know. That's none of my business, but he is aware of this. He is, he's talking to Abbott's campaign. It's like, but this is a serious issue. But now
I think it's funny how people assume, just on another note, that congressmen, and especially me in particular, have far more power than I really do.
Well, I think it's a lot
I
that
I have the power to go vote on legislation.
Well, also you have to realize, though, you have the sphere of influence that follows you, though. Like, if Dan Crenshaw goes down to the border and then like interviews the troops, I won't lie, there is truth to that. Like, if you went down, if you did something like that, it would definitely bring a massive spotlight to it. And it would garnish a lot more appreciation.
Yeah, I mean, we want to know what's going on. This has been brought to light just within the last few days. Really, the start of it was our conversation. The governor's office hasn't really given me any information. This is a 100% state level issue.
Right.
100%. This has zero to do with the federal government. So that's another reason that my jurisdiction just doesn't apply here. I want to know more facts. Because there's always multiple sides to these stories.
Well, and I agree with you there.
But I think the criticisms appear to be, or the complaints, let's say, appear to be very valid. But I want to know more.
And I've seen some of these pictures. I mean, I'm to the point now where, like, talking to my producer about, like, actually going down to visit some of these places. I got a buddy that's an officer in the Guard, and he's one of these very few people that I trust implicitly. He doesn't lie. He's a very even he's saying the same thing. We're talking about back pay issues. We're talking about soldiers that can't afford to feed their families right now. We got people down there without helmets, without rifles. We got 2 mags a pop. They're guarding big donor ranches. And there's a lot, and I understand, just like anybody else out there, I was a platoon sergeant for a few years in 101st. I know Joe is going to bitch. I know Joe. I was Joe. I bitched as well. So it's hard to differentiate what's bitching and then what's legitimate, kind of like, hey, if there are 3 things we always taught: you don't fuck with a soldier's woman, his money, or his chow. And when I'm seeing that there are money issues, when there are chow issues, like, there's an issue here. And I served in the Guard for a year, and the unit I was in was just complete garbage. It's like, I don't know how the hell you guys are operating, and that's why I had to leave. It's like, this is just nuts to me that you guys even still operate. But there are many issues, and it kind of aggravates me that I feel like Abbott he's losing a lot of support. And I'm throwing my weight behind Allen West. I hope he takes it. It feels like Abbott was trying to get this optic against Biden by essentially sending troops down to the southern border. But Dan, what I'm telling you, I have read so many messages of people that aren't even in the same units that I've verified this stuff. And it's like there are reports that are similar across the board that are saying virtually almost the same thing, and they're not even in the same units. So if anything, it's at least worthy of an investigation. But Abbott's not saying anything because I think up for re-election, he's not going to address this, because if he does, it's going to say, well, hey, I've got some fault here. Was I doing this for an optical hit piece? Meanwhile, it feels like, I think the general consensus for a lot of soldiers at the southern border feel like there is no mission, like they're being wasted.
Yeah, okay, so there's a lot to unpack there. Because the truth of the matter is, it is very difficult for the National Guard to actually enforce the law. Now, what Abbott has done is funded training for National Guardsmen, but it can only be so many at a time, obviously, training to be effectively deputized so that they would have the same arrest authority as DPS. Now, of course, the vast majority don't have that. The vast majority are indeed there as a show of force. Yeah. Right? In the hopes that when you have this show of force, it deters more caravans from coming over.
And it hasn't.
So I think there should be some understanding for the position that Abbott is in, because everybody's demanding action, and then he does action, and now everybody's complaining about the action. I mean, the unfortunate reality is that this is a federal issue, the border is, and President Biden is deliberately ignoring the constitutional duty to enforce the laws of the land.
Why do you think that is?
Because he's an asshole. I don't know.
Didn't expect that answer, but I do agree with it. To me, it doesn't make sense. Like, why is this being ignored at the federal level when this is such an issue? Because we're talking about like the leading killer of 18 to 20 or 30 something year old men is now fentanyl in certain
18
areas.
To 45.
18 to 45. Yeah, thank you.
The leading death is fentanyl.
And it's like, this is pouring over the border. Now, as a libertarian, I'm kind of like, I believe in legalizing all drugs. You're going to do what you want to do. I just don't believe in a federal fiscal safety net that's going to save you when you choose to stick that needle in your arm. You do it, you're on your own. But again, if we have a group of people that supposedly say that, we want to, that's one of the whole roles of government, of the federal government, is to ensure the sovereignty of the nation. And the border is definitely one of them. It's like, well, what the hell are we supposed to do now? And there are people, even Democrats on the southern border, as I'm sure you well know, are like, we're about to flip. It's like, this is ridiculous. Like, we're being overrun here. And even guardsmen that are messaging me is like, John, like, I am watching them cross the border. They're being detained. They're being interviewed, and they're being released into the populace, saying you have to promise to come back for your court appearance. Like, this solves nothing. Right. Like, we have a border issue.
This is something we talk about a lot. And there were certain policies put into place by the Trump administration that were very effective. And these policies effectively disincentivize crossing, because the main incentive to come across is this catch and release. It's not a program necessarily. It's just it's a consequence of a court ruling from 2014 called the Flores settlement. Well, that court ruling happened in 1997, and then it was changed again in 2014. That's why we've seen waves of migrants with minors coming across. So if you don't enforce the law and send people back right away, then they obviously have an incentive to come across. This is a very, very simple problem to fix. Yeah, very simple problem to fix. And this is how you fix it. You put more resources in the form of immigration judges, asylum officers, and facilities to hold people. You put those resources down at the border, and you also lengthen. You use legislative power to change that court settlement, which said that you can't hold minors past 21 days. You change that to like 90 days, and now you've solved the problem, because you can quickly adjudicate these claims of asylum or adjudicate these illegal border crossings quickly and deport quickly. If you can do that, you completely fix the problem.
I don't know if I agree with that, though, because we have people that are they're deported and they come right back.
Well, they can keep coming back all they want, but as long as they're getting deported, I'm talking about large numbers here. You will disincentivize thousands of people from coming across. Obviously, there's people like that, yes. Right. There's people who are trying. I'm talking about the main problem, because the main problem is not people trying to escape Border Patrol. The main problem is people turning themselves into Border Patrol, going through our prone process. They use Border Patrol as their process. Yeah. So, look, you're always going to have people, John, trying to escape the authorities and sneak through. 100%. You're always going to have that, but that doesn't even come close to comparing to the numbers of people who are just turning themselves in because they know full well that we're just going to release them on the back end. So talking about the largest effects, you do what I just said, and some of that looks like Trump's policies too, the Remain in Mexico policy and the asylum cooperation agreements with Northern Triangle countries that basically said, look, if you want to claim asylum, do it at our embassy, do it at our consulate. Why are you coming to our border to do that? Because if you really have an emergency, why don't you come to the nearest place close to you? Yeah, because it's not really asylum. That's why. That's exactly. Of course, we all know that. Yeah. So it was those policies are sort of calling the bluff of people who are really just economic migrants, but coming here claiming asylum.
Do you feel like economically, if there was a means, because to me it's kind of like we can sit there and try and create the mousetrap, and excuse me for using this analogy, but it seems like we can try and recreate the mousetrap all we want, but the cheese is still there as bait. Until you remove that cheese, economically, the mice are going to continue coming. And I hate to make that reference, but it makes it more understanding to people. But it just seems as if like until you essentially disincentivize them from coming over to reap the economic benefits, it's not going to stop regardless. No matter what kind of or how many judges you put in place, it's like there's still the reason is still there. And that's the thing that kind of bothers me because like I don't think states like California would ever do something like that.
Well, when you say the economic mousetrap, it kind of, I think that really what you're saying is, maybe I'm misinterpreting what you're saying, but I think you're referring to the fact that America is just the best place to be.
Oh, exactly.
It's always going to be the best place to be. And there was, I think, an interesting Gallup poll or Pew, maybe a Pew Research study that somehow came up with this number that around the world, when asked if someone would immediately transport from where they are now into the United States and become an American, about 40 million people would do that right away. Just instantly, I would do that. Yeah. So you're always going to have a very, very long line. The question is how you process through that line. And if you have a process that sends people back who do not have a valid reason for coming across in the first place, then there's just going to be less people trying to come across. It's purely based. I mean, these policies are purely based on human incentives. And behavioral incentives. So
half of them, I can't even blame half of them. Like when you're wanting to leave a third world country that your leadership is just such toxic garbage. I mean, who wouldn't? I mean, as a parent, wouldn't you want the best for your child? But again, it's like that boat metaphor. We can't take on so many people, economically turn ourselves upside down to the point where it's like we've got some, I get what you're saying, but it just seems to me like we have a serious issue the federal government right now is not addressing. Kamala Harris seems to be AWOL. I mean, they're polling low. They are polling insanely low right now.
Well, are you saying we're disagreeing on something? I'm not sure we're disagreeing on anything. I mean, what solutions do you think are better?
In regards to economically, I mean, from my own experiences, I used to work pulling wire for an electrician company on offshore oil rigs before I had two tenures in the military. I got out and then did civilian side again. And what I saw was essentially that, and if you have to go, let me know. I know we're taking up a lot of your time here. But I saw a lot of
these. It's a holiday, John. I'm spending my holiday with you.
Oh man, I feel so blessed. Feel so good. John and the Rhino.
We're going on 2 hours here pretty soon. have we debunked all of the conspiracy?
Probably not. There's probably so much more out there. I'm sure that you were somehow in bed with some kind of satellite that's going to beam down.
Alex Jones said I was part of an organized crime syndicate.
Alex Jones, I feel like he's gotten some things right and he's gotten some things wrong, as does anybody. I mean, it's just that to me, it's like, man, I'll be honest with you. I don't trust Glenn Beck. I don't trust Alex Jones. I don't trust anybody. I feel like Glenn Beck, and I'm not trying to talk shit about this guy. I just feel that I think Beck jumped on the Trump train because originally he was against Trump. And I understand that. I get that. But it felt like he saw the way Trump's poll was going and he was like, you know what? I'm a Trump supporter. And I watched the episode. I'm like, bro, you were like adamant about, like, you were so anti-Trump. And now it's like, Jesus, like, okay, I get it. I mean, I understand the whole political landscape and stuff. But to go back, Alex Jones has said a lot of things that I'm just kind of like, I don't know. I just
I
don't
wouldn't
know.
Put Alex Jones and Glenn Beck even in the close.
Well, no, yeah, but you get where I'm saying. I feel like everyone has their own audience they're trying to go after, I guess, in a sense. So it's kind of like what's your angle? Like what's the angle here?
This is the message I've been trying to deliver this whole conversation. That's exactly that. Now I happen to like Glenn Beck quite a bit. So I'll say that for the record. I
don't hate the guy. I'm just saying, yeah.
Like a lot of people turned from never Trumpers to always 100% Trumpers. The question is when they did it, I think is a more appropriate question. I mean, you've got guys going after me on the radio here in Houston who were denouncing Trump supporters, laughing in their faces, laughing at callers when they called and asked him why he wasn't on the train. And this was well into Trump's presidency. So it's one thing to be like, hey, I was a Cruz supporter, and you know, I didn't like him, but you know, he was our nominee, so I supported him. That's understandable, right? But there are hypocrites out there, and it's of course the people attacking me, because John, when I said that line, when I was talking to that audience, and you know, when I mentioned the Freedom Caucus, but when I said liars and grifters, I wasn't talking about the Freedom Caucus, not as a whole. I would actually never label them as a whole in any way. What I was talking about were exactly the people that have since come after me, because they feel like I exposed something. They feel like I exposed the con, where I question the angle, exactly like you said. Question the angle that people have here. What is the issue they're really trying to get at? What are they really representing?
Yeah.
And you know, there's so many cases where if you just peek behind the curtain a little bit, you're not going to like what you find. And but instead, you know, people try to turn on me, and I'm like, look, I'm an open book, man. I'm an open book. Like I just tell you what I think. And if you're going to attack me for something, you better have some good evidence.
And I'm not saying this is apologies for my camera going out. It's overheating here in the office. My producer's like working his ass off to make this happen, so apologies for that. If you were like, say for example, like somebody said, hey, would you ever like admit to or submit to a forensic audit? Would you do that for proof? Not saying it would happen. Would you? For
me?
Yeah.
What do you mean?
As far as like
on my
everything, to have people look into everything,
into
your bank accounts, your trades, everything.
I think some things are. Oh, you mean like stock trades? Like, sure. I mean, they're already public.
Yeah.
Like they're completely 100% public. Like we have to report these things in ways that nobody else does. I mean, that's why I laugh at the whole insider trading accusation. I know we can kind of keep going back to this.
Yeah.
But I chuckle at it because one, I have very, very few trades. Right. I could have made one trade worth $100 and beat the market by 100% and been number one on that list. You know, like look into this, people. Right. Like look at how much I actually traded. You know, I really don't very much. Like it's very much a sort of like, oh, what did Jim Cramer say today? Okay, let's do that. Like,
right.
I mean, you can believe me or not believe me, but you know, those are just the facts. This stuff is public.
I want to, and I apologize to keep coming back to this, but I do want to move on to the final topic I wanted to address with you, because I know from your military background and things such as that, we're seeing Ukraine in the news a lot more now. Oh, and before I forget, someone I think you should look into is Tony Cowden out of North Carolina's, I think it's
I like what I see with Tony Cowden. I've been told to look into him before. Yeah. Yes.
I had him on the show.
100%.
We interviewed him. He's got a lot of libertarian viewpoints. I like where he goes with this. He's running as a Republican. You have to play the game. But he's going against Bo Hines, who's got a lot of money behind his campaign. He's a turning point guy. He's going after the Trump nominee hardcore, or Trump support hardcore. Tony's not. Tony's basically saying I'm grassroots, former Green Beret. If I were you, I would suggest looking into him. And I'm not trying to pick a side here, but I think Tony's definitely the man for the job versus a younger guy. It seems like Tony's got his head on right, but just something to look into.
Well, you're not the first person to tell me that, so maybe we will.
That's good, because I know you're endorsing Luttrell. He's doing his thing down here in Texas as well. I know he's going to make a run for it. And to go back to the Ukraine, we've seen there is reports right now of possible false flag attack to incentivize a potential invasion. Where do you see this going as far as this administration's role in that potential conflict that could happen? Because the thing with Putin is Putin does not play around. Putin doesn't care. Putin's Putin.
So I'm not sure how to address the potential false flag operation. It's not a.
Well, they're saying essentially they were staging
that theory.
Yeah, they were staging. This is in the press. They said they were staging potential attacks on Ukrainians to make it look as if. Oh God, how did it go? It was I just read it the other day. Essentially, it was to make it look like these Ukrainians were attacking Russia, and then Russia was going to retaliate by invading. They were going to basically stage false flag attacks.
Okay, so the Russians would create the false flag attacks as an excuse to invade.
And exactly.
Right.
Yeah, and then the Russian government denied it, saying that's not true. But they're saying there's troop movements, things such as that are going on right now towards the Ukrainian border.
Yeah, this is not a good situation, and it's not an easy situation to tackle. Generally speaking, in international politics, you got to mean what you say, and don't put yourself in a position where somebody can call your bluff.
Right.
America's not going to go to war over Ukraine.
No.
And nobody's suggesting that. There's been some weird comments on our own side, like, well, these warmongers talking about no, it's like they're talking about sanctions. They're talking about Nord Stream 2. These are very valid concerns to have, and valid ways to push back and try to deter Russia from doing what it's doing. So I actually liked the way Trump ran his foreign policy. He was labeled as this isolationist, but like that's what the Trump supporters like to believe about him. But he wasn't that at all. He was a realist, and who I think understood some very basic things about international relations, which is you must use power and leverage to deter or incentivize behaviors. It's really that simple.
I mean, he got Kim Jong-il to the table, the negotiation table. That's a feat in itself. The fact that you got North Korea to the negotiation table, but just because you flexed on them, is like, good Lord, like, that's impressive. That's very impressive to me.
And sometimes you got to flex. And I think Trump inherently understood that, but for some reason, that segment of the party often takes this position where any flexing is warmongering, and that's a very strange and binary way to look at things. There's quite a bit of foreign policy options between doing nothing and being a pushover, or doing everything and going to war. Right? There's quite a few policy options in between. And the way you have to look at the Ukraine is what can we do to deter this action? Because it should be at least agreed upon that we don't want them to invade the Ukraine.
Right.
Look, America was very isolationist in World War II, and eventually we got into the battle. But imagine if we'd gotten into it earlier. Imagine if we'd actually, if we'd pushed back against our own isolationist tendencies at the time. And this was like 90% of people, as the Germans were invading France, like 90% of people didn't want us to get involved in that war. If we had done it earlier, we would have had far fewer people lost. Far less damage done, and a much quicker victory. So there is logic to this idea that some kind of action, whatever that action may be, will indeed prevent the kind of war that you're so afraid of. And there is some logic to this notion that authoritarians will keep being authoritarians, and one invasion is not their last invasion, just because they say it is.
Right.
And this is obviously the case with something like a place like Russia, which has invaded Georgia and then Ukraine.
Yeah.
And then what's next? And what's next after that? Notice that whenever Russians do military exercises, those military exercises are always offensive in nature. Bombing Stockholm, attacking NATO. Like, they're always offensive in nature. They're never defensive in nature. So they don't really believe that we're going to invade them. They don't really believe that. They say that. They say that, like, oh, poor us. Like, we're just so scared of NATO on our borders. They're full of crap. They don't actually believe we're going to invade. We would never invade. We have no reason to. And so I didn't give you any solutions there. It's hard to say what the Biden administration should do. It's a very difficult situation, and may be one that we cannot ultimately control. But there should be some kind of consequences, and those consequences are mostly economic in nature.
Yeah, because Putin already talked about sanctions. If America tries to push for any kind of sanctioning, it's going to lead to a breaking off of America and things such as that.
A breaking off of what?
Essentially, I don't know. It was Putin just doing his thing to where he's basically saying, like, don't try and flex on me because I'll flex peacocking back. I don't know. But it does concern me with the Biden administration that nobody takes him seriously, it feels like. It feels like on the international...
That is a very big problem.
It feels on the international stage, Biden has lost so much credibility. You have open threats being made against sitting members of Congress from Iran and things like that, essentially for... when Trump went and assassinated what's-his-face, the general that was also responsible for, I can't remember. I read it in the news earlier, and it was just like, I don't think I would have seen anything like this under the Trump administration, to where you have a country making open threats, and Trump would be like, well, you know what, go ahead, try me, see what happens. I will drop a bomb so big. It just feels like America is not viewed as very strong anymore on the international stage.
Yeah, it's a big problem, and I mean, Afghanistan had a lot to do with that. And then I think Biden's general incompetence has a lot to do with that. People don't see him as a coherent leader because he's not. And it's deeply problematic. Our NATO allies were very perturbed by what happened in Afghanistan. That sudden withdrawal was an unnecessarily sudden withdrawal. Yeah. And they were not notified in any kind of proper way. And they're really pissed off about it. And so they certainly don't think that anybody's going to have their back. In Europe, the Taiwanese are worried as well with respect to China. So, yeah, I mean, what you're saying is completely correct. and we need new leadership as a result. But we're not going to get that until at least 2024.
Do you think Trump's going to run again in 2024?
It seems that way. I mean, he's saying it, so I mean, take him at his word.
It does make me wonder, though, because he's been going after DeSantis a little bit here and there as far as some subtle jabs in private that is getting leaked to the press. It seems like DeSantis is gathering a lot of steam in the GOP based upon his previous stances, and it seems like do you think Trump views him as a potential threat?
The honest answer to this is I don't know.
Mm-hmm.
I really don't know because I'm not in these orbits in any real way. There were some comments that people took to mean that were a swipe at DeSantis recently. I saw that reported. I haven't seen much else. Look, honestly, I just don't know. It's still not for another year will we really see who's actually planning to run for president. Maybe a little sooner, but until then, everybody keeps their cards pretty close to their chest.
I know in 2022 midterms coming up as well in 2024, there's a lot of people really pushing hard, like in Georgia and states like Florida and Texas, that are really trying to safeguard the election process. It seems like a lot of Democrats, like the speech that Biden made in Georgia, which essentially was just such a fallacy of saying that if you do agree with these voter ID laws, that you're in fact on the side of the likes of Jefferson Davis, making akin to racism. Where do you stand on the idea of trying to ensure that we have a more highly protected voting system?
Well, I probably stand where you think I stand on that.
Well, no, the only reason I'm asking is I want you to give it in your words. I don't want to put words in your mouth. I want you to be the one to say this.
I think election integrity is certainly an issue that we have to address. And I think Texas and Georgia in particular have done it really well. And the reason I say that is because it's almost like that we baited the Democrats on these. We changed very basic things that in some cases, like in Georgia's case, I think make it easier to vote, but also more secure. And this riled up the Democrats and made them say the craziest things. And I think our best argument when it comes to voting integrity and election integrity is, look, because I'm talking to somebody who disagrees with us on this. Look, election is basically a competition. It's a game. And in any game or competition, you have to have very strict rules in place so that you know who won and who lost, and that who went outside those rules. The looser you make those rules, the more uncertain the game is. And this makes people really, really upset when it comes in politics, because there's a lot at stake in politics. It's not just a football game. And so that's why we care about rules. And these rules that we're proposing are not very dramatic. They're very common sense. We just want to make sure that one person is voting one time and that they're an eligible voter. This is very simple. And there's simple ways to do that, and that's all we're trying to do. So I think Biden really missed the mark there. I mean, he's just not with the majority of Americans on this one.
He's losing a lot of steam in his own base, his own voter base. There's so many people that are actually coming out against him now, saying he's just gone off the reservation. The other thing is, and this is, I think, a lot of this originally had a lot of attention brought to it. It seems like Biden is just, he feels like he's out of it. Like he's, when he's reading the teleprompter and then he's reading end quote and stuff like that, it feels like he's just kind of, he's getting old. He's older. It feels like this guy is like, he probably shouldn't be doing it. It scares me because it feels like we have another Ruth Bader Ginsburg, someone that probably shouldn't be in that role anymore because they're just too old to do the job. It makes me feel like Biden is the exact same way. And it almost looks, and for me, this is all optics, that Kamala, it seems like she's trying to distance herself a little bit from this because she knows the Biden administration is sinking. I mean, they're polling insanely low.
Yeah, I mean, she's no better, right? I don't think her approval rating has gone up since the election.
No.
More than like 2%.
I mean, she polled at 1% in the primaries. We know why Biden picked her. So, like, she was never going to do exceptionally well.
Yeah. No, I don't know what the Democrats are going to do in 2024. They're in a bad situation. That's why you're seeing all these articles recently, I think, about Hillary Clinton coming back.
Yeah.
I mean, I just can't have... I don't even want to think about it.
Well, Dan, I appreciate you coming on the show, taking your time out of your busy your day, and I shouldn't say celebrating, but spending your holiday here on the show. I greatly appreciate your input, your opinions, and stuff. And thank you for having a good civil discussion with me. It's always appreciated because, God forbid, in this day and age of social media, I'm supposed to come on here and try and get some kind of viral gotcha moment and be like, oh, I got Congressman Crenshaw and stuff like that. I think people don't realize,
worry,
like,
John, somebody will take something out of context.
I'm sure they will. I'm sure they will. And,
it.
you know, again, apparently we're bros now, and I'm probably on the globalist forum as well, and that's where I stand now. But, you know, I appreciate you doing that because, God forbid, I've had so many friends, like, reach out because anytime I announce that you're coming, I was like, ask them this. Like, I'm not asking them that. That's the dumbest question I've ever seen. It's like, if you have something that's legitimate that you really, because the stock thing is okay, there's some legitimacy here. I want to delve into this and see, because even in the chat, people are like, ask me about the stocks. Like, I did. I was like, we've circled back to it several different times, and it wasn't intentional. Yeah. But I appreciate you coming on here and, you know, again, spending some time with me. It really means a lot that we can actually have these discussions, because I want to try and get more people from government on the show to actually get their pieces on certain things, to where we have different perspectives, whether we agree or not. I do appreciate the fact that you will share your perspective and how you see things, and hopefully people can garnish something good from this, and hopefully not all negative. But again, you know, people are just very set in their ways when it comes to how they view an individual. There's, you know, negative, positive association bias, and it's not the attempt of changing minds. It's just the attempt of letting you get a different side of the spectrum to see where somebody stands, whether you agree with it or not. At least listen to it and hear what they have to say.
Yeah, and I appreciate you having me on, John, because there's, as it turns out, the people yelling at me, we don't actually disagree on these things. It would be great if it was an actual disagreement that we could debate and just say, you know what, I'm in my corner, you're in your corner. The problem is that these are manufactured most of the time, and that frustrates me. So thanks for coming. Thanks for the conversation, so that we could clarify a few things.
Absolutely. I guess I'm the TMZ of the political spectrum now. I'll take it. Whatever. No. All right. Well, you have yourself a good day. And again, thank you for coming on the show, Congressman, and have a happy Martin Luther King Day.
Thanks, John.
Be safe. All right. That does it for this episode of the All American Savage Show podcast. To those in the chat, I fielded a lot of questions that I saw on Twitch and things similar to that. Here's the deal. You know, people are going to sit there and say, oh my God, you're freaking giving this guy a platform, yada, yada, yada. This is a, hold on. Congressman Crenshaw wants to come back on and talk about Tony. So let me pull up Skype. Oh, we're going to continue it. Hold on. Okay. Never mind. We already did. Okay, my bad. Anyway, I appreciate all the love and support. Thank you for sharing the podcast. This episode is brought to you by shellshockcbd.com. To those that are actually listening, that are actually commenting with comments that are supporting of the show and trying to get some different perspective, hey, I appreciate you. Thank you for coming on here and saying, you know, I can agree or disagree. I respect that. Again, there are some things that I don't agree with Congressman on, but the fact that he's willing to take time out of his day and come on the show and give his viewpoints, I appreciate that, because he doesn't have to. And there's one thing I do want to clarify. Some people out there don't seem to realize that I'm not going to bring on a sitting member of Congress, even if it was AOC or Marjorie Taylor Greene, and come on here and try and attack them to get some kind of viral soundbite. I want to hear what they have to say. I have my opinions. I've expressed those opinions. If you still feel like, you know, you hate Crenshaw or you like Crenshaw, that's the overall goal of this, is just to have a conversation. And people are also going to come in late to the podcast and say, well, he's not asking them the hard questions. I've asked a lot of questions. I've tried to get a better understanding of certain things. It's up to you, the viewer, to come to your own conclusion and do your own research. There's only so much we can do when we interview someone and have a conversation. That's the point. So if you can't respect that and you automatically want to just lump me on someone's side just for having me on the show, it's very disappointing to see people like that. Because, again, I'm not going to surround myself in an echo chamber of people that automatically agree with me. I like people that disagree with me and then hearing their viewpoints, because a lot of you people also tuned into Drunken Debates. When I was doing Drunken Debates on Twitch, you love that because I was bringing on socialists, communists, transgenders, but you didn't have anything to say then. You actually encouraged it. Because why? You like the dissenting opinion. You like different points of view and hearing those out. Or is it because you just want to see people fight because of entertainment value? You take that for what it is, ladies and gentlemen. But again, I appreciate everybody coming on here and supporting the show, supporting shellshockcbd.com. And for people that want to end this and say, you know, John was too nice to Dan, this is a sitting member of Congress that said, I'm going to come on your show. I'm not going to be a prick to anybody. It's just not how it's going to be. I would be, you forget, they are a guest on this show. I don't care if they are the most liberal of liberal. I'm going to treat them with respect when they come on this show. That's going to be something that I always do, and I will always continue to do. And if you don't like that, here's where I say, unfollow, unsub, don't watch. That's simple as that. That's how it's always going to be. So if you want someone to go do a gotcha soundbite, like I'm going to call them an asshole, it's not going to happen. Not on the show, not when they're a guest. So, you take that for what it is. If you don't like it, unfollow the channel. Don't really care. I just love having these discussions. For everybody else out there that doesn't like it, just unfollow. You don't have to be here. If you don't like how I do it, bounce. It's just that simple. But anyway, I appreciate it. Thank you for all the love and support. Again, make sure you check out shellshockcbd.com and support us there. Again, make sure you share the podcast. This will be available on iTunes, Spotify, and SoundCloud. And as for that, we will see you bright and early tomorrow, same time, roughly.